as I also would like to introduce our guest joining us on the broadcast, Sushant Sareen, who's a senior fellow ORF, strategic affairs expert. Mr. Sareen, thank you for being on India Today. Rajiv Dogra, who's a former Indian diplomat, and Niranjan Marjani, who's again a foreign affairs expert. I want to thank you all for being on India Today this afternoon. Sushant Sareen, if I could come to you on two factors. First, of course, largely to understand that Iran has very limited possibilities of taking this head on when it comes to the US, given their military capability. So will they resort to other means, using proxy forces or blocking the Strait of Hormuz in order to block the oil supply? Also, the very tweet that has come in from the Russian Federation Council, where they say that as far as nuke in Iran is concerned, we will provide all the support and they will continue to make it because not much has been affected. Sushant.
Look, I'm not going to go behind what statements are being issued from various capitals and various personalities. All of them are obviously going to be loaded. I think what is important is to understand the unpredictability of war. As of now, it seems, yes, the US and Israel have certainly got a major lead over Iran. But then, Iran also gets a vote. And the question is, what are Iran's options? Sandeep very eloquently put it that, yes, the Iranians can block the Straits of Hormuz. And what is the objective of war? The objective of war is to cause as much damage to the enemy as you can. Now, for Iran right now, everybody is an enemy. And they need to show that they can do certain things that will not just force Iran onto the table, but that will also force other people to come onto the table. So, yes, Straits of Hormuz certainly remains a very valid option. Second, yes, they can, depending on how many lives they are willing to sacrifice, and the Iranians could be interested in sacrificing many lives, they could start attacking American bases or American targets, and not just Israel. Now, that pulls the Americans into this conflict in a much bigger way. But then the Americans have to ask themselves the question that do they want that quick in and out and deliver the message, bring Iran onto the table, and this is where things end? Or do they get into a longer kind of a conflict, a long drawn out conflict? How much of Iran are they going to bomb? Who all are they going to bomb? Will they be able to capture Iran after that? What are they going to achieve with this long drawn out? If this conflict becomes long drawn out, then what happens? So I would imagine that the American calculation will be that they've delivered a very strong message. This should bring the Iranians onto the table. The Iranians are not going to come onto the table simply because if they come onto the table now, it means total surrender.
Right.
I don't think they would want to go onto a negotiating table with no cards to play. So they need to have some cards to play, which means that we are in that unpredictable, situation of how this war is likely to unfold from here on.
All right, Rajiv Dogra, if I could get your point of view on this, because Iran is really hoping for global support and that is what they are urging. So far, they are portraying like they are at the receiving end. Obviously, not really believable given their support to the proxy forces, to how, they are wanting to affect the US bases also. But given the fact that we've seen a lot of the world leaders respond so far, and while majority call for de-escalation and using diplomacy as a route, I want you to comment on Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he spoke to the Iranian president, and a very measured response. India remains neutral so far, but will India continue with the same position? Could there be a point where India could be forced to take sides? How do you see it?
Well, that's a load of questions. Good that you're asking on those. And starting with Prime Minister Modi, I think that is a good, sane, positive voice in support of a second thought, that instead of continuing with the war, all the actors concerned should give peace a chance. That's the central message. And unfortunately, not many other leaders, not many other countries have given out a similar call. So I think that stands with the Indian tradition of trying to de-escalate things wherever they occur. Second is the question that why is it that only Iran is put in the guilty corner? Is Iran the cause of it all? Has Iran started this war? Did Iran target civilians to start with? Or did the fault lie somewhere else? Another question that I would like to ask, thinking aloud, is that America claims they use the bunker buster bombs. What is the proof that only bunker buster bombs were used? After all, Trump had talked of using tactical nukes a couple of days back. Are we sure that they were only bunker buster bombs and nothing else? Because Medvedev's statement, I mean, I take it that Medvedev can be loose in his comments
Right.
sometimes. But the fact that former president of Russia, presently occupying a very senior position in Russia, speaks of transfer of nukes by some country, he didn't say Russia, some country to Iran, that means that Russia thinks that things may have gone out of control and escalated to a very serious level through this bombing by Americans. So there are a lot of imponderables that we are witnessing right now. The other point I wish to make, I'm no supporter of Iran, but I think as a dispassionate observer and participant of diplomacy for many decades, I also wish to point out that so far, including in the previous instance when they were close to war between Iran and Israel, Iran's response and Iran's actions have been very measured. Even now, despite having sent in missiles and so on, Iran has been restrained compared to Israel's actions in Iran so far. So I think there would be surprises now from Iran's side, whether they are on American bases in Gulf, and some of them are just about 30 kilometers away from Iranian territory, or on ships, or elsewhere, remains to be seen. But for the moment, I don't see peace returning to this region.
All right, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, since you've raised the point of proof, I'd like to take this to Sandeep Punithan, because there have been contradictions as far as this is concerned. US President Donald Trump saying that it has been a successful attack on the 3 key sites in Iran. But Iran is maintaining that they had shifted their assets earlier on and there hasn't been any significant damage. So US has nothing to celebrate about. Who is to believe, and how do you observe the aftermath of this strike?
Well, good question, Suresha. And in fact, we must wait for the bomb damage assessment, the photographs. A few of them are out, but I think we should see this in greater detail and analyze this to see to what extent Donald Trump is correct in his statements about having neutralized all of Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities, especially Fordo. For now, it doesn't appear that the damage has been as substantial as it's been claimed, because all we are seeing is a couple of photographs with a few craters, a few holes in the target sites, no massive craters of the kind that you would have expected with the use of such massive ordnance. So actually, we're waiting for those photographs, the evidence that Iran's nuclear capability has really been set back by a number of years by these attacks on these 3 facilities. It's unprecedented. The numbers that he's talking about, 30 Tomahawk missiles, 12 GBU-57s, these are munitions of a kind that have never been used. In fact, this is the first combat use of the GBU-57. It's a massive bomb. It's each GBU-57 weighs as much as more than, in fact, 2 MiG-21 fighter aircraft. That's how heavy that bomb is. It can be only carried by 3 bombers of the United States, 3 types of bombers. And, the use of that, so far from the photographs that are emerging, the satellite imagery that we are seeing, doesn't seem to suggest that the damage has been as massive as the US is claiming it is. So we actually would like to see a little more concrete evidence, and I emphasize the word concrete to,
Right.
before we can go to any conclusions that Iran's nuclear facilities have been completely destroyed.
All right. Well, we do wait for that. Niranjan Marjani, I want to come to you because this, of course, is a significant point and will really decide for what Iran's level of retaliation be. But even as we discuss their options, because Trump says it is time for peace, but it will be a loss of face for Iran if they back down. So they say we will not back down. What do you think will be the pros and cons of Iranian retaliation? How far do you think they can go?
Definitely, if Iran at this point of time accepts US offer for a dialogue, then it will be a loss of face. And after the attacks by the United States, Iran will be looking to retaliate against either United States bases in the Middle East or even against Israel. Now, what kind of attack can Iran carry out? Only I think we'll have to wait and see if at all it retaliates. But it does have a few options with it, like it can block the Strait of Hormuz, as we have been discussing, and
Right.
it could carry out attacks against US bases. It could use its proxies like Hezbollah and Houthis to carry out attacks. But I would like to, raise one more point in this. We are talking about the escalation between Iran on one hand and US and Israel on the other hand, and how long can this conflict go on. But we also need to understand, when we talk about Iran attacking US bases, then the Gulf states also come into picture, and will they be willing to be drawn into this conflict? I think we also need to consider this question. Yes, it is true that the Gulf states do not have very cordial relations with Iran, but how much conflict even can Gulf states sustain, and whether they can support US and Israel position for a long drawn conflict or war against Iran, because it will include a massive economic costs for everyone in the region. So I think we also need to focus on that perspective, how the Gulf states would think and how they would act in this conflict while US and Israel take action against Iran. So I do think that Iran will look forward to strike. Iran will retaliate against the US and Israel. And I don't think that the region is going to be stable, at least for the next few days. And I think this conflict will continue. That is how I read the situation.
All right, I request you, gentlemen, to do stay on as we continue to bring in all the aspects of this attack and what is likely to be expected. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization that has confirmed that 3 nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordo and Isfahan, were hit in enemy strikes. Though Iran has claimed that there are no signs of contamination, adding that there is no danger to its residents, the agency criticized the IAEA for inaction and urged global condemnation, vowing not to halt nuclear development. Meanwhile, Iranian leadership has said that every American citizen or military in the region is now a legitimate target. Following US airstrikes, sirens sounded in Tel Aviv as Iranian missiles were intercepted. Now, Iran has several retaliation options. It may rely on asymmetric tactics, including proxy attacks by Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, or the Houthis. Cyber attacks targeting US infrastructure are also likely. Tehran is also threatening to pull out from Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that is the NPT. While direct missile or drone strikes are possible, they risk broader conflict. Diplomatically, Iran may pursue legal action and seek backing from allies like Russia, China, and BRICS. Full-scale war is unlikely, but Iran is expected to respond in a calculated, multi-front manner.
Well, I have been in touch with Tehran, of course. I still do not have exact information about the level of damages, but I don't think it matters how much damages have been made. Attacking a nuclear facility by itself is an unforgivable violation of international law and should be condemned. Well, I think it is irrelevant to ask Iran to return to diplomacy, because we were in the middle of diplomacy. We were in the middle of talks with the United States when Israelis blew it up. And again, we were in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans, happened only 2 days ago in Geneva, when this time Americans decided to blow it up. So we were in diplomacy, but we were attacked militarily. So it was not Iran, but the US who betrayed diplomacy. They betrayed negotiations. When at the middle of negotiations with us, they gave green light to Israelis, if not instructed them to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. I think they have proved that they are not men of diplomacy, and they only understand the language of threat and force. And this is very unfortunate.
حرکتی که رژیم صهیونیستی انجام داد و دولت جنایتکار آمریکا هم بامداد امروز انجام داد، برای اولین باره که در تاریخ انجام میشه. البته میخوام عرض بکنم که ما با توجه به تمهیداتی که از پیش بینی کرده بودیم، برنامه‌ریزی هایی که شده بود برای اینکه ایمنی و سلامتی مردم عزیزمون حفظ بشه، اقداماتی رو انجام داده بودیم که الحمدلله حتی با این حمله جنایتکارانه هم ما هیچ گونه آلودگی پرتویی و یا تشعشعات هسته‌ای خارج از سایت هامون نداشتیم و مردم بدون نگرانی میتوانند در اطراف سایت به زندگی عادیشون ادامه بدن.
سحرگاه امروز سایت‌های هسته‌ای کشور در فوردو، نتنز و اصفهان طی اقدامی وحشیانه و مغایر با قوانین بین المللی به ویژه معاهده عدم اشاعه سلاح‌های اتمی NPT مورد تهاجم دشمنان ایران اسلامی قرار گرفت. این اقدام مغایر با قوانین بین المللی متاسفانه در سایه بی‌تفاوتی و بلکه همراهی آژانس بین المللی انرژی اتمی انجام شده است. دشمن آمریکایی از طریق فضای مجازی توسط رئیس جمهور این کشور مسئولیت حمله به سایت‌های یاد شده را که بر اساس موافقتنامه پادمان و معاهده NPT تحت نظارت مستمر آژانس بین المللی انرژی اتمی می باشد را بر عهده گرفته است.
All right, so Shamsareen, if I can come back to you to understand what exactly is Iran's end game? Because they have been challenging US assets in the region, and many ask, have they not been the ones to provoke? What is your view?
Look, in any conflict, it's not just one side. I think there are provocations from all sides. It's not as though the Americans or the Israelis have exactly been, very cuddly with the Iranians. And the Iranians, of course, have been for many, many years, threatening to undo Israel, have been in conflict with the Americans, and have created proxy organizations, most of which have more or less been dismantled right now around the region, and have been problematic for many of the countries around the region. Now, I would imagine that the big problem for many of the countries around the region is going to be this dichotomy or this big gap between the imperatives of those states or the regimes and the sentiment on the street. And I think that is going to be in conflict. We will see that in state after state, that the governments of various Arab states will want to walk the tightrope on this particular issue, neither want to take on Iran nor want to go against the United States, but the sentiment on the street will be completely different. So I think they will have their task cut out for them. And if Iran was to attack any of these countries, I think they will have a tough call to make, whether they say that we are going to hit back, or they say, well, Iran is only attacking American bases, they're not attacking our sovereignty, so we can ignore it. I don't know what they're going to do, but there is that possibility. But the thing for Iran is going to be that the end game which they will want is that, one, the regime survives and is able to maintain a control and order in Iran. That is one. And second, that they get out of this war with their dignity intact and with something left over, some negotiating space left over. Now, if the Americans and the Europeans and all their allies insist that Iran has to go in for complete capitulation on everything that is being demanded of them on the nuclear program, then it'll be a very, very tough call for the Iranian regime to accept it. I don't see how they can accept it and then expect to survive. And if they don't accept it, then the path, one of the possibilities is that you get caught in a long drawn out conflict, which I don't think anybody wants. I don't think the Israelis can afford a very long drawn out conflict, and don't go after what people are saying publicly. You can see the sentiment on the street. Nobody wants missiles raining down in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and in other Israeli cities. The Iranians don't want this constant bombardment of their military sites, their nuclear sites, and some of their residential areas, civic infrastructure. The Americans don't want to be caught in a long drawn-out conflict, and none of the countries in the region want this conflict to linger on. Now, everybody wants the conflict to end, but nobody has the magic key to bring everybody onto the table and get a deal which everybody can live with, which satisfies the Israelis and the Americans on Iran's nuclear program, which leaves Iran with a modicum of dignity and some face saving. I don't know what that magic bullet is going to be. Maybe the ambassador can, delve into that. I can't.
Okay. Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, while please feel free to elaborate on that particular point, I also wanted to understand where you come from when we talk about Donald Trump having taken this decision. Would you say it was a calibrated warning, or is it a prelude to war? And what the impact of this decision would be on Donald Trump?
Well, I think let me sort of give a little background. It'll take not more than a couple of minutes. First, taking off from where Sushant left, I think it's important to understand exactly the composition of Gulf. Gulf countries are not entirely Sunni. There are places, for example, Bahrain is a majority Shia population. For example, in Saudi Arabia, the oil-producing area of Saudi Arabia is Shia majority. So it's not going to be very simple for these countries also to simply say that we condemn Iran, we want it out of this world, and so on. That's not practical. Even if the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia may have said it at one point of time or the other, in practical terms, he will face resistance from within. Second, if Iran attacks, it will only attack the American bases. And America has already anticipated some of it, because reports are that in Qatar, where they have a big base, they've already moved out their fighters from there a couple of days back, because Qatar is just about 30 odd kilometers away from Iran. The other thing is that Iran is not going to accept peace without honor. And this is not the first time Iran has faced America. In the 80s, Iraq attacked Iran with full support of America, and the war went on for 8 years. Iran did not give up. Iran suffered hugely. So what we also have to keep in view is the fact that besides being a huge and very important civilization of this world, Iranians are very nationalistic in their attitude, and they will not, the young men of Iran, they may want regime change, but they do not want Iran to be pulverized. So they will fight. And Israel and America may have taken on more than they can handle. They may have much better armaments, may have much better fighters and so on, every kind of equipment. But as Houthis have shown, that if you have the will, you can sink their ships. So there may be more surprises in store than America may have bargained for.
Okay, quickly bringing in Sandeep on this. Sandeep, what are the outcomes that you're possibly predicting? Because Washington DC, of course, is monitoring everything. And while they say that we do not want to escalate this and Iran must call it quits here, but very unlikely that it may happen. As much as their options are far and few, but your take on the possible outcomes now.
Well, Suresh, I tend to agree with what Sushant Sareen said. The fact that the number one goal before the Iranian regime today is regime survival. They've been in power for 45 years, from 1979 onwards. They've, fought that bruising 8-year conflict with Iraq, which was again supported by the West, including the United States. They lost, there were a total of 500,000 people that died in that war between 1980 and 88. And Iran came out, it didn't collapse, the regime didn't collapse. But today you're looking at the kind of pressure that it has never faced in the past. These kind of bombings, unprecedented. It does not have control over its airspace. You have Israeli and American aircraft roaming around, bombing at will, killing their scientists and leaders. So it is a very precarious situation for the regime, and it's also survived that very massive civilian protest in 2021 and 22. But today it faces, an existential crisis. So, it might have fatally miscalculated 20 months back when they just jumped into that conflict with Israel. They activated their proxy networks, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, to attack Israel. But I think Israel played the war of attrition, and 20 months later, the war is at Iran's doorstep. Their nuclear facilities have been attacked, their scientists have been killed, their generals have been killed, their air defense networks have been destroyed, their air force has been, whatever is left of their air force has been shattered. So they are in a very, very deep crisis at the moment. So, from all accounts, it seems that the regime would rather prefer to focus on surviving this unprecedented wave of strikes and try and somehow, look for a face saver, carry out a few symbolic attacks maybe, because they are very pragmatic at the end of the day. While Trump might try to paint them as these mad mullahs with bombs, the Iranian regime has been pretty pragmatic in the last couple of ways, in the way they have handled very grave provocations like the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani on Iraq. They informed the United States about through very covert channels. They informed them that they were going to strike on US bases, so that they ensured that the bases were cleared of personnel. So it is quite possible they will do something very symbolic, after this. But the options before them are extremely limited, and they will focus on rebuilding their strength and especially their shattered infrastructure, the military infrastructure on the ground, which has taken such a heavy beating in the last 8 days.
And which may also take a long, long time. Sandeep and all our guests joining us on the panel this afternoon, I want to thank you all